Good evening and welcome everyone to this conversation, a very special episode organized by the Industry Connect Department of Sister Nivedita University.
Indrila, you're muted, so please, unmute yourself and talk.
Okay, that's something we have to get adjusted to. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this conversation, a very special episode organized by this Industry Connect Department of Sister Nivedita University. While all our webinars are definitely special, today's session promises to be exceptional, made so by the presence of the speakers. It is indeed a privilege and an honor for us to be able to bring to you this episode, where we will get to hear two exceptional writers who inhabit and write about very different worlds, but are connected by the city, our city, Kolkata. They will talk about their craft, their ideas behind their craft, and the city, and of course, the city that connects them. Dr. Mahul Brahma, writer, popular writer, definitely, we all know him, in conversation with celebrated author Amit Chaudhuri. Amit Chaudhuri needs no introduction, definitely. He's a versatile personality. I can only quote from Amartya Sen's words to describe him. Amartya Sen says, it is really quite extraordinary that someone could have had that kind of range that Amit Chaudhuri has in terms of his works, and it could be so consistently of highest quality. As we all know, he's an essayist, musician, composer, and author of 7 novels, the latest of which is A Friend of My Youth. He is a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. Awards for his fiction include the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, the Sanjeev Times Book Prize for inaugural Infosys Prize in the Humanities contribution to literary studies. His first novel, A Strange and Sublime Address, is included comments at Carmen Modern Library, the 200 best novels of the last 50 years. And his second novel, Afternoon Rag, was on the novelist Anne Ann Wright's list of 10 best short stories for The Guardian. Its 25th anniversary edition appeared last year with a new introduction by the critic James Wood. In the NYRB, in fact, Hilary Mantel said, Amit Chaudhuri has, like Proust, perfected the art of the moment. According to the American Indologist historian Wendy Doniger, his novels are the most internal, psychological, delicately written, introspective of all the contemporary Indian novelists. Of course, we know that's not it. He's a multifaceted personality. He's a highly regarded singer in the Hindustani classical tradition, of whom Vikram Seth had said, Chaudhuri is a wonderful singer without any qualifications, such as considering his distinction as a writer. There's a sense of calm, simplicity, and inwardness to his singing, which deeply appeals to me. He has also been acclaimed as a path-breaking composer and improviser who performed most recently at Queen Elizabeth Hall, London. In 2017, the government of West Bengal awarded Chaudhuri the Sangeet Samman for his contribution to Indian classical music. He's a professor of contemporary literature at the University of East Anglia and was University of College London's annual visiting fellow in 2018. He was also an inaugural fellow at the Columbia Institute of Ideas and Imagination in Paris, and 2019 became an honorary fellow at College Oxford. In 2009, he was one of the judges of the Man Booker International Prize. And of course, literary activism. 2015, he began the annual symposium on behalf of the University of East Anglia in Calcutta and other cities under the rubric of literary activism to create a non-professionalized space for critical discussion on creative practice, raising critical questions no longer explored either in academic conferences or literary festivals. In the same year, in fact, he began a movement now known as the Calcutta Architectural Legacies to protect Calcutta's early 20th century non-heritage residential houses and also to understand the modernity from which they arose. Thank you so much. It is an honor for us that we have him here for this webinar. Our other guest tonight is obviously a very popular author, another very popular author, Dr. Mahul Brahma, who wears many hats as well. An author, a filmmaker, and also a professional with an inspiring track record in the communication sector. He's a luxury commentator, chief editor, award-winning communicator, and filmmaker. His first book, Decoding Lux, is an authoritative book on luxury in India. It has received appreciation from Amitabh Bachchan, Ratan Tata, Vivek Dev Roy, Governor and Chief Minister of West Bengal, and the like. Subsequently, he has written 2 more, Dark, Lux, and Lux Inferno, completing a trilogy. He writes columns on luxury and brands for Economic Times, Hindu, Reputation Today, and other leading publications. He is also a regular speaker in B-School and industry bodies on luxury, brands, and crisis communication. He's a chief editor and head CSR, corporate communications, branding, publications, and conferences for a Tata Group company, M Junction. He's a member of CII. He has been a senior editor with leading publications such as New York Times, India Partner, New York Times India Partner, Economic Times, CNBC TV 18. He loves to play golf, make films, act in films, and paint. His first short film was screened at Cannes Film Festival. He's an alumni of IIM Calcutta, St. Xavier's College, and of course, University of Cambridge Dutch School of Business. He's won definitely many awards. He's won winner of CSR Leader of the Year Award in 2019, winner of Best Communications Strategist of the Year in 2019, winner of Brand Leadership Award in 2017, listed among most influential PR professionals under the age of 40 by Reputation Today. Winner of E-Commerce Communication Leader of the Year in 2017. In the same year, he won winner of Certificate of Excellence in Corporate Communication 2017. It is my pleasure and an honor definitely to welcome Dr. Brahma to this session. Welcome participants to this very special session. Dr. Mahul Brahma in conversation with a versatile personality and author, Amit Chaudhuri. We will definitely take a few questions at the end, so participants can write their questions in the chat box. Also, we are streaming live on YouTube, so if there are any questions, you can send them in the channel's comment section or the chat box. We will definitely soon start the session, as all of you are waiting eagerly. Before that, I would request our director, Ms. Ina Bose, to give her opening remarks. Ma'am.
Thank you, Indrila. It was a real, I would say, a shock that I had got when Mr. Amit Chaudhuri had so very kindly agreed to my call for addressing our students, our faculties, our officials. I didn't expect to get this confirmation for him so soon. He doesn't know me, but it was so nice of him that just an introduction about our university was good enough to introduce myself and make him agree to talk to this audience. Thank you, Mr. Chaudhuri. Thank you so much. Mr. Chaudhuri, I'm so sorry to inform our audience that he's going through a crisis period himself with two very close relatives fighting from this COVID-19 in a very critical stage, both of them are. So in spite of all that crisis situation that he's going through, he has not failed to keep his word and join our session. Mahul is, of course, a very old friend of mine. Indila has already introduced him. Many of my colleagues probably know him. He's a well-known name in the Kolkata PR fraternity, I would say. I will not waste much of your time. I shouldn't come in between the two great authors and the audience. Mahul, please take up the show now. It's all yours and Mr. Chaudhuri's.
Thanks, Indri. Thanks, appreciate it. Thanks, Indrila, for the kind introduction. So, you know, I have long back taken the liberty with Mr. Amit Chaudhuri to call him Amidda. So I'll use that liberty today as well in the conversation. So Amidda, I'm so glad to have you here and get a chance to converse with you in this platform. Thanks to SNU. So Amidda, you know, I'll start with a quiz question, and I'll read a small bit from one of your book, and you have to tell me what book it is. So I'll do that.
Yeah.
He saw the lane, small houses, unlovely and unremarkable, stood face to face with each other. Chota Mama's house had a pomelo tree in its tiny courtyard with madhubi creepers by its windows. A boy stood clinging to the rusting iron gate, while another boy pushed it backwards and forward. As he did so, the first boy traveled in a small arc through space. When the taxi stopped in front of the house, they stared at it with great dignity for a few moments and then ran off in terror, leaving the gates swingingly, mildly and illegally. A window opened above. It was so silent for a second that Sandeep could hear someone unlocking it, and Babla's face appeared behind the mullions.
You want me to say which book this is?
No. So, you know, this...
Long time ago, I could have forgotten.
Yeah, you could have forgotten. Yes, yes.
Because I wrote it between 1986 and 1988, and it came out in 1991. Because it was it had to wait to get a publisher because the publishers who were interested then got nervous because I when I revised the book, I I almost threw out half the book. So it became a very short book, as you know, if you've read it. So when they saw that this is not what we'd expected. It's a completely non-commercial proposition. So they became a bit nervous, which meant that I had to wait another 2 years after completing it before the book got, more than 2 years, 2.5 years before it got published, before it saw light of day. But yeah, Strange and Sublime Address, that house on which I had in mind when writing those lines no longer stands.
Okay, okay.
In fact, the mama, Choto Mama, on the person also I had in mind is very ill right now. The person in that book, on whom so I was listening to you and thinking of how much time has passed in all kinds of ways from the time when I wrote
Right,
this
right.
line. Yeah, and I think one of my cousins, my mother and I had arrived in Calcutta on one of these trips, and there were 3 cousins of mine in that house, and the younger boy, I remember once we arrived and he said, he saw me, he suddenly noticed that I was there downstairs. I just arrived from Bombay. And he said, he called me by my dark name and he said, "Tu yaka eli?" So we never forgot that. That yeah, he just saw it as an almost natural occurrence, this kind of surprise of his cousin turning up from
Right.
Bombay and asking a kind of perfectly mature question: "Did you come by yourself?" So all of that was in my mind when I was writing this. This particular opening paragraph.
Yeah, I know. Because I read out from this paragraph because for any author, the first paragraph of his first book, has a special significance, has a special meaning in his or her life. So I thought I'll read it out from you. And I'm so glad you spoke about the journey of the first book. So my natural question was that how did you and when did you decide that you need to pen a book? I mean, how did you become an author from a student of literature to maybe a natural transition? But what thoughts came into and that too, writing about Calcutta and the first book, how did it come about, this thought of and you while you shared a little bit of the struggle of getting the first publisher, which I struggled for, I think, 4.5 years, with my first book, from one publisher to another, because they said luxury is a category where we don't want to experiment. And a pest that you don't have, that you didn't have at that point of time, Avidya, there is a pest now which is called self-publishing. There is, it has become a very, very issue. So I want to know your thoughts on how how you became an author, how you decided to write a book, and that journey, a little of which you shared with us. So typically the kind of audience we have today, most of them are budding authors and students of literature or mass comm, and they need a little bit of guidance which they don't usually get outside. So I would love to hear your journey.
My journey, well, it's a complicated one, simply because in my head, there are so many different turns and changes in direction in that journey. But I suppose I became, I've said this so many times, but I'll say it again. I became interested in writing at an early age. Uh, and I don't know why, but it's connected in my life with the acquiring of English as a language. So I was born in Calcutta, but my parents then moved
Okay.
to Bombay, and that's where I grew up. Um, but my parents made it a point never to speak to me in any other language but Bangla. So they had this kind of idealism about the Bengali language, and maybe they thought that also that one should speak with one's child in the mother tongue, or maybe they felt it most natural to do so. And actually, we did that with our daughter as well. The same thing happened without thinking about it so consciously. So our daughter went through the same thing as I did. That is, I didn't know English uh, at the time when I had to be admitted to a school, you know. And so I remember there was a kind of interview in school, and this was Cathedral and John Connon School. And my memory goes back to that interview and just how tearful and unhappy I was because I didn't know the language, you know, I didn't know English. And they took me in anyway. I mean, this is 1966.
Right.
So, or 67 if I was 5, maybe 67, because 66 I was in the kindergarten. And the kindergarten was for European children. So I didn't mix with anybody, you know, over there. There were Indian children. It was in Malabar Hill. That's where my father was staying at the time, where we were staying. So I remember standing at the doorway, not mixing with anybody, and knowing Bangla to speak to my parents with, and Hindi because, you know, the people who worked in a house spoke in Hindi. So no English. And then I joined Cathedral School, which was just across the road. And then the headmistress said, give him Ladybird books and comic books to read, and he'll pick up the language very quickly. And at that age, I did pick it up quickly. I picked it up in about a couple of weeks. And then I immediately got into this whole business of writing stories. And I wrote a story, you know, which the teacher praised because, no doubt, because I didn't know any English and now I knew English, you know, to encourage me. And so it was a story about a dog, about a puppy. Anyway, about being a puppy, about being a dog. It was narrated by a puppy, you know.
That's amazing at that age. My God.
So anyway, because I loved the idea of having a dog. It was my life is full of these kind of desires for, you know, unfulfillable things. But anyway, so I think writing for me from a very early age was therefore early on was connected with picking up a new language, the excitement of picking up a new language, and with fantasy. You know, like the fantasy of being a dog or having a dog, various other fantasies. My fantasy life was very rich, you know, and it was full of the strangest of things. My deepest ambition when I was that age was to be, maybe not so strange, but the driver of a car. You know, to have the job of a chauffeur. You know, so all this fed into that world. But I have to say, Mahul, that through school, and through much of college, my primary interest was poetry, not prose. And I spent years and years reading poetry and imitating the poets I admired, and I had no academic interest. I mean, I went on to study literature at University College London, and then do a PhD in English from Oxford. But
PH Lawrence, your
that's right. Yeah. All those were kind of ploys. There were kind of Trojan horses to enter a domain where I could then write and achieve my ambitions as a writer. So I was using those as alibis, you know. So you know, and when I was in London, this is between 83 and 86, I was still intent on writing poetry. I would say that it was with poetry that I first discovered what it is I wanted to do as a writer. So at the age of 23, I wrote a poem when I was in Warren Street in London, called St. Cyril Road, Bandra.
Right.
And this poem was written in response to an area in Bandra to which my father and mother had moved after my father's retirement, from all the way from the other parts we'd lived.
Malabar Hill to
Malabar Hill, Cuff Parade, and then
right.
Bandra. And I remember discovering Bandra on my trips from London, and thinking, this is so amazing, this area, and it reminded me it also excited me in the way Bhawanipur in Calcutta had done on my trips there as a child. So, I loved looking out from a third floor balcony onto another balcony, which is what St. Cyril Road was about, which was very unlike Malabar Hill, where we lived on the 12th floor and looked out on the Arabian Sea.
Arabian Sea.
It was all very impressive, that view. But I preferred looking out onto this other balcony, So I liked that kind of reduction of the horizon that came with St. Cyril Road.
Mm-hmm.
And that my horizon should consist of other human life which I could eavesdrop on or spy upon.
Mm-hmm.
And that had always been of interest to me, even as a child when I used to visit my uncle's house in Protapaditya Road. Mm-hmm. This discovery of life across the road in somebody else's house. So I wrote a poem called St. Cyril Road in response to all of this.
Right.
And with that poem, I think I realized that what I wanted to write about was the ordinary and the everyday, and what was close at hand, and what could be accessed through a third floor balcony, second floor balcony. Okay. So I gave up writing in the way that I thought was proper to literature, about great themes, or great emotions. I gave up writing about those things. I decided to write about what was accessible from the third floor balcony, which was basically the lane, the street, noises from the street, people passing by, the sense of transition, nothing fixed, nothing big, no monuments, another person's house. And this would then become my subject matter as a novelist as well.
Right.
I began to write that novel after finishing in London, finishing my BA, and going back to St. Cyril Road in my gap year. I took a year off. And in that year off, I wrote more poems about St. Cyril Road, and then I began to write a novel about Calcutta. So that's how that happened. The idea of writing a novel about Calcutta, about a holiday in Calcutta, and basically about writing about a life which was enchanted by whatever escaped monumentality, escaped importance, escaped significance, everything that had abdicated from being significant, and being monumental, being central. All of that induced a state of enchantment in the narrator. The narrator was obviously one who was bored by significance, by importance, by landmarks, and by monuments, and was enchanted by everything that was on the outskirts of those things. So I think that's what that book was about. Calcutta meant for me a place which went off in different directions and was so exciting as a city because of these various directions it went into, which had nothing to do with the monumental or the significant, but had to do with the everyday, had to do with the street, had to do with houses, to do with what you glimpsed in the windows of those behind the windows of those houses, had to do with balconies, had to do with rooftops and terraces.
So it's a very conscious effort of your mind to make a transition from there to there over the years, so that you can focus more and more on those balconies and on the terraces and on the windows and what's happening, rather than the expanse that most of the writers will rather pick up compared to writing something which they might term as very mundane and very simple and very close to home. So they'll write about something which is far away, and create this entire world of fantasy and all that. So you've been very, in your writing as well as your poetry, you've been extremely conscious of choosing that side, which is not that.
I was very conscious early on.
Okay.
I mean, of course, after 29, more than 30 years of writing, 29 years as a published writer. But if I began in 1986, then it's been more than, whatever. I knew very early on that because I was turning against myself, I was arguing not with others, but with myself.
Right.
So when I was 17 or 18, if you'd asked me that such a kind of writing, if such a writing were possible, it wouldn't have occurred to me that it's possible, because I thought writing should be about trauma, or should be about, if not more personal trauma, then the trauma of civilization. This is what I'd been taught by misreading of modernism.
Absolutely.
When I was growing up in the 70s, there was a buzzword, existentialism, and it kind of we were all existentialists at 17, 18. There was another word called absurdist theater, and all of that. I kind of now, not now, but at that time when I moved away from it, I identified with a kind of inwardness, with the self, existentialism, the self. And I wanted to move out of the self into the street, into light, into space.
Right.
So there was an argument going on with myself. The earlier self, which I thought, one must write about the self and through that give significance to one's subjects, the crisis of the self. I wanted to reject that and move out into the street, into light, into space, and into sound. The sound became very important to me, So I made these notes as well. I knew that I was stepping out of the self into the street with a strange and sublime address. You know? And I also wrote at the back, whatever the imagination, nothing that one can imagine can be as unexpected as reality. I wrote that as a 24-year-old, not the exact words, but more or less. So there was a kind of argument going on where I was speaking to my earlier self, which thought that I must imagine things in a variety that was significant in some way. But then suddenly came to realize that there's no point in undertaking such a project unless you notice the variety of things around you. That to quote Louis McNeice, life is incorrigibly plural. You know, life. He says life is incorrigibly plural. So he doesn't say the imagination. He says life is. So the emphasis moved when I was that age, 24 to 26, to acknowledging that what was important was this discovery of the plurality of life, not the greatness of literary themes or significance that comes from there, but that plurality of life. And what does it take to notice it? How is it that we miss it? How is it that it is right in front of us and we do not see it?
We do not see it.
Yeah.
And we do not see it. Absolutely. I'll poke you a little bit about the importance of sound, because that is something that is extremely interesting. You said that you also notice the sound, that it plays an important part. I'd like to you to slightly elaborate on that.
So sound again is something that I first kind of would have noticed the importance of in Pratapadit Road, Bhawanipur, maybe in Bombay, but then we began to live in flats on the 12th
Right.
floor,
Right.
and in Kafpuri it was on the 25th floor. So I didn't get a great deal of access to sound. But in Pratapadit Road, um, there were always sounds coming in from other houses or somewhere across the road, somewhere you couldn't see. At that time, there was still um, hawkers and vendors who would pass through the lane and would have their own individual street cries.
Okay.
There were all kinds of street cries and sounds at that time, and there was a cakewala who whose whose call used to come as a kind of echo, and all you would hear was something like "dala," you know, yeah. And I said to my cousin, "What is he
What
saying?
is saying?
What is "dala"?" And he said, "Kekala," you know. So because he was trying to, I suppose, expend as little energy as possible on this kind of repetitive sound he was making, but at the same time, it was important for him to announce the fact that he was
That
passing
is,
through.
yes, passing through. Yeah.
And I see these, I think of these moments, and I see them without nostalgia. I mean, they have no nostalgic value for me at all. They, it's to do with the intrusion of invisible kind of people for a while, whether that is a vendor or some other person, and that was happening all the time. So when I say sound, I mean, and it could be the sound of a radio as well. You know, it was the incursion of the invisible, because you couldn't see what was making the sound.
Right, right, right.
So the world was full of, the lane was full of sounds, which means that it was full of the presence of what was not visible. You know, uh, at at any point of time, you could sense things and presences which you couldn't see. You know, and this 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 thing, the proximity of lives which were not visible or seeable,
Mm-hmm.
to me meant a lot. It meant a lot. I hate silence as a result, because it kind of, that's why I don't like the silence of Europe or England, where I suffered because of the silence, because it takes away that suggestiveness that makes the invisible proximate, makes the invisible a part of our lives. That seems to go away once you're there. The silence kind of cuts that out. So
It creates a distance between you and what is happening around, which you're not able to decipher through that sound.
yeah,
And then it just cuts that cord, and therefore
cuts that cord to what's around you, which is not visible, maybe,
right,
and
right,
and which you respond to imaginatively. You are always imagining on some level, without thinking you're doing so,
right, right,
uh, where these sounds are coming from. I mean, some widening of your consciousness is taking part each time.
right,
Kind of opening up of the self is taking part each time to imagine and receive these essentially strange noises.
right,
You know, even if it's hammering. You know, some kind of opening takes part.
right,
If you become intolerant towards sound, then you close down that
right,
part.
right,
You know,
right.
and you begin to resent the hammering.
Huh.
So that kind of persona, you begin to inhabit more in the West, where you might get disturbed by the incursion of a sound
Mm-hmm.
much more than you do over here.
Mm.
Over here, at every point, you are opening up yourself, and yourself therefore becomes strangely decentered in itself. You're always distracted. Some part of you is always distracted. in the West, consciousness is much more focused.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. You spoke a little while back on how you started imitating, the poets that you were reading. So in prose as well as in poetry, especially for authors or for poets, they consume so much of great literature and great styles that it becomes very, very easy to be inspired by, one of them or many of them, or, end up having a mix of it.
Yeah.
So this is also a question for the budding authors, that how do you keep your identity? How do you develop your style? Because there's, so much available to you, and especially if you're an avid reader, it becomes more and more available to you, and starts influencing you more and more in terms of writing prose or poetry both.
Yeah.
So how do you form your identity? How do you develop your style?
For me, it was an important part of learning how to write, I suppose. You know, I was imitating poets.
Right.
I was writing poetry, and imitating the poets I admired, and I would move from poet to poet. You know, every month or every week, sometimes I'd have a new enthusiasm, and I would inhabit that kind of voice and way of writing about things, looking at things. I was teaching a creative writing workshop last week, and somebody said to me, "Well, somebody said something about a workshop, and I've never done a workshop before." So I said, "Even I've never done a workshop before." Because in those days there were no creative writing workshops, and they were looked upon. I mean, they were there in America. They were looked upon with suspicion, as they still are to a certain extent, but far more so at that time. So she said to me, "Then how did you? I mean, how did you learn how to write? If so I said, I did that by imitating poets. That's how I learned how to write, by imitating others, by passing through that apprentice period, and then gradually through that, learning more and more about the skills of writing, until when you discover when the randomness of experience then suddenly begins to press upon you, and you realize that you don't need to write about the things that others have written about, that there is some kind of inchoate sort of thing over here that is of importance, but why of importance you don't know, because it's not important according to what you read earlier.
Mhm.
So there are no answers as to why I should be writing about this room or that street.
Right. Right.
Imitating somebody, then you follow not only their style but their idea of what's important in a poem or a story.
Right. Right.
So there, the question of what your material is or what you're supposed to write about has already been solved, as it were.
Right.
Now, let's say in that world you continue to write about partition, let us say. You write a story about partition because you've been told this is a very important subject. You don't have any experience of partition, but that doesn't stop you from writing several stories about it. Then suddenly it might happen in your life that you might suddenly find that you can't get out of your head a man who used to sit on a porch and smoke all the time. And then you think to yourself, but this is not about partition.
Yeah.
How do I write about this? Because I am told that, to be an important writer, I have to write about partition. That writing, as far as I can understand, has a certain number of significant concerns and subjects. But the man smoking under the porch, who is coming to my head all the time, is not one of them.
Is not one of them.
no, he's not one of them. So what do I do? So at that point, the skills you have picked up so far have to rearrange themselves, and 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 uh, and you have to get a new sense of what is important and what is not. There, uh, it will not, this realignment will not follow uh, a kind of rule book that already exists. So that's the way it goes. At least for me, at least that's how I see it.
No, it is extremely helpful, and so I was just thinking that it's such a journey, of a writer. Um, uh, a question on Calcutta. Uh, you know, from the time you started living here uh,
Mm.
till now, Calcutta has always been a city of contradictions. So there were certain kind of contradictions then, certain
Yeah.
kind of contradictions now. So I just wanted to understand how, in your perspective, the city has changed and the contradictions have transformed. A, and B, I'm extremely keen for you to share your project on signages, because that is absolutely amazing. I've seen the transformations that you're trying to bring into the city. That's absolutely great work. So if you just speak a few words on that.
About signs, is that what
About the signages, the changes in signs that you're doing for the city, renaming the streets and all that.
Oh, I'm not really renaming the streets. I'm working with sort of creating my own road signs.
Right, right.
And those are meant only, well, I've exhibited them in an art exhibition that I did.
Right, right.
And I just decided to use the space of a road sign to put in other things.
Okay.
Because I noticed that so this is part of an art project.
Art project.
Yeah. I undertook it very hesitantly because I thought that people are skeptical anyway about what kind of writer I am, and then whether I'm what kind of singer I am, and now for me to undertake art will invite further derision, So I was kind of hesitant, and I hesitated for about 7 years, and then I decided I will undertake this experiment. So there were 3 ideas in my head, and one of them had to do with road signs. So the road signs in India, road signs uh, have the names of roads and streets. They are usually blue with white borders and white letters. But sometimes they also have messages like cleanliness is next to godliness, Victorian messages, or haste makes waste. You'll see them while coming from the airport, those kind of signs. So I just thought, I don't know why I thought suddenly, what if I, no, I didn't think, what if I put this in there instead? It just, certain phrases came to me and I thought, this needs to go into a road sign. So examples of the phrases like taka mati mati taka, Ramakrishna. I thought, let me put that in a road sign. Or full of merit yet poetically man dwells on this earth. This is the poet Hölderlin, and this line is of great value to the philosopher Heidegger. So I said, I want to put that in a road sign. So I began. I'm sorry, it's making me laugh. The kind of ridiculous ideas.
No, that's a fantastic idea, and a little bit on the contradictions, as I said, on how the city has changed, its contradictions has changed. A little bit on that.
The city that impressed me so much as a child. I mean, not impressed me. That makes me sound like an examiner. I mean, the city which moved me and had such an impact on me as a child. Yeah, that has changed. it's changed for a long time. It was one of the great modern cities of the world, Calcutta.
Mhm.
It is still to be, it's what it was is still to be completely fully understood, because we don't have a history of modernity outside of a Western history of modernity.
Mhm.
Once we begin to sort of um, have a more interesting and challenging and extended idea of modernity, then surely what Calcutta was will be an important part of that history.
Right, right.
And I think that is um, what had an impact on me when I was growing up here. And right now I still see the remnants of that history in the buildings of the south and the north,
Mhm.
which are being rapidly destroyed
Not,
by
yeah.
developers.
Mhm.
Um, but some of it is there in the Bangla language, but Bangla is doesn't not have any patronage from the government or from anywhere. So it needs some patronage. Earlier, it was patronized by a very well-to-do but idealistic set of people.
Mhm.
But they did have the economic means
Right, right.
to so when in the late 19th century, let us say Madhusudan Datta or Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, after having written in English first, decided to turn to Bangla, they had the means to and the kind of cultural clout to make
Continue writing. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
an important
Mhm.
and far-reaching sort of decision.
Mhm.
Um, so some kind of the when that kind of experiment is undertaken, it needs to have the support of a class of people.
Mhm.
So right now, Bengali has no support at all, and it certainly doesn't have any support from the government. And I'm a writer in English. I have no personal axe to grind except the fact that something very important is being culturally depleted in my
Mhm.
background, and that is not my Bengali background, but my background as a modern. My background as a modern is being depleted as I notice all these resources vanishing. So I'm
Mhm.
not speaking on behalf of Bengaliness, as much as I'm speaking of my the history of modernity, which has formed me and may have formed others who are here today.
Mhm.
So I'm sorry, this may not be. Yeah, it's maybe a too complicated an answer, but it's an honest answer to what you were saying. What do I think of Calcutta today? But at the same time, these things cannot be artificially kind of sustained through kind of ossification and you know by putting them in some kind of museum. But yeah, we Calcutta today, it there is a deep void here. There is a deep cultural void over here. But that is true of the rest of India and the rest of the world as well. A new void has come to exist. But we will see. I mean, periods in history are, as we know,
Right,
they change, they end.
right.
We will see what happens. Yeah.
So I can't uh, even think of you interviewing you without a question on music. So,
Yeah.
so from afternoon rag to finding the raga, how has this entire journey been? And then finding the raga, I think it's due for release next year, which got postponed due to the COVID thing. So how was your journey? What how is it different then, and how is it different now? Your music and writing on music.
Huh.
And finally, and also another added question on that is that why don't you like fusion?
Okay, I'll try and answer these questions.
Yeah.
When I wrote Afternoon Rag, um, I was, whatever, I was 29 to 30 years old when I was writing it. And it was a, it turned out to be a very short book, even shorter than A Strange and Sublime Address, which itself was a very short book. And it was even stranger than A Strange and Sublime Address. I mean, people said about A Strange and Sublime Address that it has no story. Afternoon Rag, it didn't even have a kind of continuous narrative. It was very fragmented. So I would say that at that age, I was concerned about what I was up to. It was so unlike what my contemporaries were doing and what other Indian novelists were doing.
Right.
That I worried for myself. And before Afternoon Rag came out, I was very depressed. I mean, I remember that. My wife remembers that. My mother would have told you if she were around how depressed I was. I suddenly thought, what have I done? And and this book, which is 29,000 words, and with all these fragmentary sort of chapters, is going to come out in 2 weeks. And what are they going to say to me, and about me? And now Finding the Rag, which is supposed to come out next year, is a non-fiction book about music, about my discovery of music, about my discovery of Hindustani classical music, and my understanding of what Hindustani classical music is.
Right.
But all these years have gone since I wrote that book, Afternoon Rag, to writing Finding the Raga, and by now I have a clearer idea that this is what I do, this is what I'm about, this is where my affinities lie, for better or for worse. At that time, I worried about it. At that time, I worried that I was not in keeping with what the others were doing. Now I no longer worry about it. That doesn't mean I suffer any less for it from the misunderstandings of others as to what I'm up to. But I don't have the kind of puzzlement to do with myself as to why I can't be more akin to or can't be more in sympathy with what others are doing. So I think Finding the Raga is written by a person who is exploring what it is that has made him what he is.
Okay.
Afternoon Raga is written by that person who is what he is and can't help it. And that's why he produced Afternoon Raga. A book which has no linear narrative, blah, 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 etc. 29,000 words. When, the same year, my friend Vikram Seth's novel came out, and it was, I don't know how many thousand words. It came out in the same year. Right?
Boy and this one.
Yeah. And it was, and then we were shortlisted for some of the same prizes, the Guardian Fiction Prize. And so mine was 29,000 words. His was what, 1 million words? I can't remember. So I faced with such largesse and surplus, I was thinking, what happened to me? At that time. Why can't I help being what I am? Why can I not be better? But then why don't I want to be better? Why don't I want to be cured of this condition? Finding the Rag is written by somebody who knows what
is.
I know more now.
Yeah.
What kind of history I come from, and what kind of history I don't belong to. Why I don't want to belong to that kind of history.
Right. Wonderful.
1993, I'm still arguing for it. I'm still trying to understand it. I'm still trying to make my place.
So I'll, it's always such a pleasure, chatting with you.
You'd ask me about fusion. Maybe we can come back to it some other time. Because
we'll no, please. I am. This is a personal interest. I want to hear from you your thoughts on fusion.
On fusion.
So, yeah. So
okay.
Why don't you like or approve of fusion?
No, especially in Indo-Western fusion.
Indo-Western, yes.
I won't say I disapprove of it, but Yeah, I certainly have problems with the idea. Uh, I began my music project in what the project called "This Is Not Fusion" in a particular way, and the musical reasons for calling it not fusion and how it contrasts or differs from fusion will require another 15 minutes. So I'm not going into all of that right now. Um, but fusion comes with an idea that there is something which you can immediately identify as being Indian, let us say. This is the Western fusion. And the identifying markers will have to do with the fact that this person will be singing a rag, or will be playing the tabla, or will be playing the sarod or sitar.
Right.
And will be wearing a kurta and pajamas or whatever, churidar, you know. And the Western person will be identified by the fact that they are white, that they're wearing jeans and shirt, and that they're playing jazz. You know? And then fusion will happen when you bring those two together. So on the one side, there'll be this Indian man in a kurta, and on the other side, a man in jeans, a white man in jeans. And one will be playing the double bass or guitar or whatever, and the other will be playing tabla, and somebody else will be playing sarod or singing. And then the singer will sing a rag, and a double bass player will play some chords at the back.
Right.
Or harmonic kind of responses.
Right.
The guitarist will also play some chords, and he'll be singing, Kaushi Dhani or whatever it is. I do not believe, firstly, that cultures can be identified in this way. Secondly, I don't believe that you can arrive at new forms by adding things.
Right.
You know, it's not so simple. It's not a recipe where, I will take a bit of raga and I will take a bit of bass guitar. And then once I put one on top of the other, I will come up with something called fusion. So it doesn't work like that. We have our own fusion music, which is the Hindi film music from 50s and 60s and 70s. But there, the experiments that are taking place are extremely interesting. And they don't come with some kind of prefabricated idea that let us arrive at some kind of world peace or greater human understanding by taking a bit of Indian music and putting it together with some Western music. No, I mean, they are, whether it's R.D. Burman or S.D. Burman, they are examining musical registers that have been a part of their life since their childhood.
Right.
So whether it's a horn or a piano or a Bhatiyali song or a rag, these are all registers that have been a part of their ear and their imagination since they were children.
Right.
They are therefore then delving into memory, a memory of sound when they are creating these new sounds. It's not fusion in that sense. That is not fusion either.
So, Avida, I'll request you to, if you can, read a few lines from one of your poems as per your choice, and then we'll take one or two questions because I've already exceeded the time limit given by Ina. So she.
I have exceeded it as well. Okay, let me read out something.
Right.
I'll read out. You'd asked me to read a poem, so I'll read a poem.
Right. Thank you.
Mahul, please ignore your watch.
Okay.
We are not in a hurry. It's all Mr. Amit Chaudhuri and yourself.
So, so this poem is called Shamolda. It's from a book called Sweet Shop, which came out last year. Shamolda. Shamolda, you had possibly traveled over 1,000 miles when once on our way to Rishra, pierced by hunger, you chose to stop the car and alight for a sweet. Hunger impelled you to those windows behind which, around hard chondesh and the ooze of chom chom and the yellow puddle of rabri, a haze of insects were hovering or swimming or climbing as on an island without a human being. The ants, though touched by the mishti's resin, had laboriously freed themselves to ascend slopes. The flies, enlarged by these environs, banged into each other. I asked you how you brought yourself to eat a specimen from that tray. What if there's something on it? And you laughed like a girl and invoked the Bengali imperative of hunger, evidently more immediate than sorrow. I would flick it off and eat. You waved away in a gesture the invisible living creature, as if dismissing some stupid universal decorum. So that is Shyamala.
দারুণ এটা দারুণ। এটা আমি অ্যাকচুয়ালি শুনিনি আগে। This is the first time I'll check it out. Oindrila, we can take one or two questions. So if you can just let us know the questions to Amita, we'll wrap it up after that, and
yes, actually we
actual,
have many questions pouring in, but
yeah,
we'll make a selection definitely.
Yeah, please select one or two, and then we'll go to the thank you note of it.
Okay. Obhig Gohotakurta, he's asking, you mentioned that the influence that Calcutta and Bombay had on your literary style, sir, and content. What did your stint in England have? He's asking whether you have, whether the stint in England had no influence in your writing.
It did. It definitely did. It made me aware of what I was missing. And by that, I don't mean only home, but the things I was talking about. In England, I had to keep my windows down because the windows open over there, they go up or they come down. So that's why I said down rather than open. So to close the windows, you brought them down. And so whatever noise there was in the street, you would then keep out. And so silence became a very interior thing. So and that interiority was not pleasant to me. So then I didn't like hearing the kind of rap music that was being played by my neighbor upstairs. But I loved hearing any sound that might be there outside, but which I could only hear in the summer when I would pull up the window. So what among the many realizations that came to me in England is that I liked hearing. I liked the incursion of the outside. I liked sound coming in from outside. I liked being in a state of distraction rather than in a state of focus. And these things I mentioned before to you during this conversation, Mahul. Among the other things I realized is how generous, this I realized late in my third year, at the end of my third year, as a student at University College London, how generous, for instance, one's teachers could be in England. The generosity of that kind of person. Something that was maybe if I'd grown up if I'd gone to college in India, I would have encountered that. But it was definitely, in certain cases, an extraordinary generosity. So that was something that was a revelation as well. Yeah.
Wonderful. Angela, we can take another question and then we'll go to the thank you.
Anushka Sinha, as a poet, what defines the purpose or the stimulus that allows one to write consistently?
Well, I'm trying to think. As a poet, I write as I do in prose mainly about the everyday, for the want of a better term. I mean, and like you would have noticed from this poem, I mean, it's about people who are going from Calcutta to Rishra and they stop the car because somebody wants to go out and have a sweet from a sweet shop because they're hungry. That forms the kind of subject matter of poetry too. And with poetry, one just needs to be sort of ready to kind of receive it, that what you call stimulus when it comes, because it's not something that that you can go to and find. I mean, you have to be ready for it when it arrives, when that stimulus arrives. It's certainly not something that you can seek out. That's the only thing I'd say.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amita. It's been a complete pleasure, and chatting with you. And it's been quite after quite a while that we actually chatted with each other. And I'll hand it over to Inadi now to take it over from here, so that because we've reached the conclusion of the show. So please take it over, Inadi.
Thank you, Mahul. Mr. Chaudhuri, I'm just longing that when will this pandemic be over and I can physically invite you to our university and maybe conduct a workshop for creative writing again.
Right, thank you.
Mr. Chaudhuri, we have with us here Professor Shubhit Thor. He's the Director of our International Languages. So, and we also have our Vice Chancellor, Dr. Dhubajyoti Chattopadhyay here.
Good evening. Good evening.
On this platform.
Yeah, good evening.
Good evening, sir. Professor Thor, a few words from you, and then I will ask Professor Chattopadhyay to formally give a vote of thanks.
Well, first of all, I must say that your suggestion was a wonderful one, and we certainly will take it up. Of course, having Professor Chaudhuri's time and his inclination as well. A workshop on creative writing would be marvelous, because this is something that we are a new university, and our students are very young, both in age as well as, you see, in heritage. This is the kind of thing that we always look forward to. And having such a workshop, I think, would be a very, very good idea. Thank you for making the suggestion. One of the things that we've discovered, and something that many of us know from previously, and that is, you see, Amit Chaudhuri is a fine scholar, a very, very prominent author, now an artist, because his idea about the street signs, I think, was something which is absolutely and certainly something which is very, very innovative. And the point that I was trying to make is that he is a marvelous conversationalist. So thank you, Professor Chaudhuri, for spending so much time with us, for making this a wonderful evening. Without you, this life of ours, which is already a little dull and dreary, would be much more so. Dr. Ms. Ina Bose?
Before I request Professor Chattopadhyay, our Vice Chancellor, to say a few words, I have a request to Mr. Chaudhuri. Please, ever think, since you are so multi-talented, why don't you ever think of also writing for Bengali literature?
You mean writing in Bangla?
Yeah.
I don't know Bangla that well. I mean, I did start writing in Bangla before I went to England, when I was learning it properly, because I didn't learn Bangla in school, you see. I had trouble picking up English anyway, I mean, at the age of 4. And on top of that, Banglao porbo, as I was saying to Mahul, I was not a good student. So I tried to keep away from study and hard work in school as much as I could. And then to be expected to do hard work and study at home on this mother tongue of mine, that was too much, to expect of me at that time. So Banglata এতটা মানে জানি না যে আমি বাংলায় লিখতে শুরু করব, উপন্যাস লিখবো. I don't have that vocabulary in Bengali, but but I do translate from Bangla. Bangla পড়তে পারি। Bangla পড়াটা was honed for me by when I began to sing Rabindra Sangeet. Rabindra Sangeet পড়ে মানে বাংলাটা আরো পড়াটা হয়েছিল, মানে কিছুটা উন্নতি হয়েছিল, কিন্তু I can't I'm not proficient enough to write in it. Otherwise I would. I definitely would. I have an idea for something that I want to write in Bangla, but I just don't know Bangla well enough.
Professor Chattopadhyay.
Good evening. Let me first of all thank Professor Chaudhuri, as also Mahul, for wonderfully keeping everybody in a mesmerizing state during this whole conversation period. Now, the comments you made at the end, it actually reminds me of something of the introduction in the Gitanjali, where actually it's been written, to quote, "A few days ago I said to a distinguished Bengali doctor of medicine, I know no German, yet if a translation of a German poet had moved me, I would go to the British Museum and find books in English that would tell me something of his life and of the history of its thought." But that is actually, Rabindranath Tagore always mentioned that I shall not know anything, and I shall not get the chance of these things. So similarly, as you were mentioning that, but anyway, as someone from the Bengali culture, we always love to have writings from you. But the way you did the recitation, and also you mentioned about the bag. Now, Professor Chaudhuri, I really want to convey the heartiest welcome for your visit to the Sister Nivedita University whenever we could get a chance. And it will be really a great opportunity for us. I'm sure Modhu Chanda, the head of the Department of English, also agree with me that yes, like Professor Shubir Dar, and workshop is definitely going to help our students and other faculty members. Mahul, you did a great job. The moderation is really nice, and the way you actually tackle the things are so nice. Very nice to see you.
Thanks, Drupada. Pleasure.
Oindrila, I would also like to thank you, Madam Ghosh, and all the participants who are with us. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, sir. I would like Oindrila to play a video on Sister Nivedita University for Mr. Chaudhuri to have a glimpse of the university, if that's possible. Oindrila, please try.
I'm trying. You have to give me a few minutes.
It's a short one.
It's a short one, yes.
I hope that we are not wasting the time of Professor Chaudhuri.
No, I'm not at all.
It's fine. Okay, thank you very much.
Please, is it visible?
No,
Yes. Yeah, you come to the
visible,
show.
but not the film.
Yeah, your screen is visible.
Okay, no, not. Then it's not working because I'm trying to pull up the screen, and all that's coming is
Okay, then leave it. We will
Yeah,
not,
sorry.
maybe sometime. Better Mr. Chaudhuri will come one day physically to see the university. That would be better.
Well,
Thank you, Mr. Chaudhuri. Thank you, Mahul.
Thank you so much, Hinadi. Thank you, SNU. Thank you, Drupada. It's been a pleasure. Amita, always a blast chatting with you.
Mahul, thank you
so much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. I learned a lot, as an author, it is a great advantage to get a chance to a sneak peek into your mind and how you think and how that has developed over the years in terms of perspective and all that. So it's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye then.
Thank
Bye.
you
Good
to
night.
definitely Professor Chaudhuri and Dr. Brahma, and
Thank you, Indrila.
also Professor Dhar and Professor Chattopadhyay, Vice Chancellor, for joining in. It was a wonderful session, and the audience, I'm sure today, after listening to this, after being here, several more writers will come up, because we have been inspired, I can say that. And as we have students here, not just from literature, but also students, young minds who love literature, who are literature enthusiasts. I'm sure this was a great session. And as we have the recording in YouTube now, so it will be viewed by in the future by several other budding authors as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks a
You.
lot.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure. And take care, everyone.
Yeah, take care. Stay safe.